Hello, I'm Rebecca Flaherty, and today I'm sharing a free taster lesson from one of my Skillshare classes. If you want to find out more about this class, then just follow the links in the description or go to rebeccaflaherty.com/learn. So let's get started with some painting. This method will work for almost any medium as long as you're able to scan it after you've made it. I've used this technique for watercolour, gouache and acrylic, which is what I'm going to be using in this time lapse. The actual paints or brushes you use aren't that important, so you should use whichever tools and supplies you're already working with for your artwork and pattern designing. The basic idea is to fill a page with a painted or drawn background that you would like to use with your pattern motifs. Here I'm using acrylic paint and creating a subtle painted background with a few chunky brush strokes. The most important thing to remember when you're painting is that it is a background layer, and therefore it shouldn't be too busy or detailed. There's two reasons for this. Firstly, I would say that a background layer shouldn't be competing for attention with the main motifs of your pattern. It's just meant to be a simple texture layer, just 1 or 2 steps above being a plain coloured background. Any extra details should be worked in as motifs in your main pattern. The second reason we don't want to go too detailed here, and why you wouldn't end up using this method and the shortcut I'll teach to make a whole pattern, is that it will result in the merging and patching together of some areas of the pattern. If we used a really detailed texture, then that would be really obvious and look blurred in places, but by keeping this whole painted texture quite subtle, it'll look seamless and natural. Another thing to keep in mind, which sort of goes hand in hand with it not being too busy, is to keep the colours that you use fairly close to each other. I'm using 3 similar shades of green for this texture and 2 peachy pink tones with very small amounts of a darker brown for the other one. Again, this is because if we use 3 wildly different colours, it's going to be A, too busy for a background layer, and B, won't blend together very well when we come to patch it together to make it seamless. I'm making 2 textures here as samples. The first one was a square and this second one is a rectangle. As I'll be teaching you in a later lesson, there are ways to use a square texture tile in a rectangular pattern and vice versa. So it's not a massive deal to paint in the same ratio as your pattern is going to be, but that said, if you know in advance which pattern you're painting the background for, then it makes sense to paint a square if it's for a square pattern, etc. But if you're just creating textures to add to your pattern library to use in future patterns, then just know for now that there's a way to work around the different ratios. If you want a deeper dive into creating textures to use in your work, then I highly recommend taking a look at Sue Gibbins' class on texturing motifs, as she teaches some really fab ways of making different textures, which would be perfect for them making seamless with this method I'm going to show you next. I'll put a link for that class in the resources section. So once you have your textures painted, the next step is to scan them, and I'll show you how to do that in the next video. Ever wanted to be able to use your gorgeous hand-painted textures in your surface patterns, but thought there was no easy way to make them seamless? Or maybe you've tried doing it in Photoshop and were never quite happy with the results? What if I told you you could transform them into seamless backgrounds with just one click of a mouse? Okay, maybe not that mouse. I'm Becky Flaherty, a UK illustrator, and my speciality is pattern design. This is my 3rd Skillshare class, and I'm so excited to be teaching here because this is where I learned the basics that got me started in my career as a surface designer. I've been selling and licensing my artwork for nearly 7 years now, and in that time I've constantly been tweaking and refining my workflow, coming up with new ideas and techniques to create my own methods for creating patterns and illustrations. My friends tell me that productivity and workflow are my secret superpowers. I initially got started selling my designs through print-on-demand sites such as Redbubble, Society6 and Spoonflower, and I now license my work through a wide range of companies such as Ixie and Mixtiles, as well as working with small and large businesses on freelance commissions. In this Skillshare class, you'll learn how to make gorgeous seamless textures to use as backgrounds in your surface pattern designs. Prints and patterns with a hand-drawn, textured feel are very much on trend at the moment. Just looking through the best sellers on a site like Spoonflower, you can see that a lot of these patterns have these beautiful textures used in them. Adding a textured background can really make a finishing touch that makes your design look polished and professional, and they really add depth and dimension to a design. I'll be using a painted texture as an example in this class, but this technique is great for making seamless textures out of all sorts of different mediums, such as crayons, collage, pastel, and even photographs. Basically, as long as you can scan or photograph your texture, then you can make it seamless. This is an intermediate class for students who are familiar with the very basics of pattern design and are already using Photoshop. But it's also a great class for more advanced designers, as the skills you'll learn apply to a much wider range of techniques than just creating seamless background textures. For example, making seamless textures to apply to your motifs using different blend modes, or applying textures over shapes to create paper cut style designs. As well as teaching you how to make seamless tiles, I'm also going to show you all my tips and tricks and shortcuts as we go along. For example, how to check the seams on a pattern tile, as well as how to resize and export tiles without getting that dreaded gap down the seams, and how to use backgrounds in pattern tiles with different dimensions. So there are lots of tips and tricks and shortcuts you'll pick up on the way to speed up your workflow. After taking this class, you'll be able to create beautiful, seamless textured backgrounds that fit perfectly with the rest of the motifs in your pattern, and you won't have to use boring flat backgrounds ever again. I can't wait to see you in class.